Dr. Camille Renisi here. I want to talk with you a little bit about cracking joints and that whole wonderful feeling you get when you go and you get your back popped, or you sit there in your chair and you stretch and twist until something pops. Couple of important things to know. First, we're going to talk about what is that noise, why does it happen, and why do we think it's good for us, and maybe why it doesn't make a difference. So, first and foremost, everything's theoretical. There are some pretty cool studies out there that talk a little bit about or that dive into why that sound happens. The going common theory was that it was actually the act of a bubble collapsing very rapidly, just like when we get the bubble wrap that your kids fight over, like the snap, 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 pop. I saw a really cool study that actually talks about that it is not the collapse of a bubble, but it's actually the creation of a vacuumous space. So they took some fingers and they stuck them in an MRI of a person, and they put their fingers in an MRI machine and they cracked the joint and then did a little bit of distraction so they could see what happened inside that joint. And they actually found that there was space there. So with MRI imaging, they were able to actually visualize the what occurs when you get that cavitation, that popping sound, which really makes me question, well, maybe actually we are doing a crack and we're giving ourselves space. The problem is that most studies don't support cavitation as a critical element to you feeling better, right? So we don't get better outcomes with range of motion. We don't get better outcomes with strength. We barely get better outcomes with pain, except, and I'll say this as a clinical observation, well, sometimes, and you know this too, because you could do it right now and probably feel better, is when you get that crack, it's so satisfying, right? Does that happen at a joint level? Like, oh, thank goodness, like something moved. Does that happen at a neural level or an endorphin level where like that crack occurs and now there's a rapid signaling to your brain that something happened and it gives you relief? Don't know. Or is it just in your head where you have been seeking this crack and whew, I feel better? Don't know. The research is variable. Do I try to crack people? Sometimes. There's a few that I might do, but I'm worried less about trying to get a pop and more about trying to mobilize a stuck joint. So, what are we doing as practitioners when we do that mobilization? So, say I've got somebody in their thoracic spine, and that's where we all would love to experience a crack, right? I come in and I feel every joint, and I start to notice that, like, man, right here it just doesn't move. Like it doesn't move the way the others do. It feels like a wall. And indeed, the person might sit there and go, "Whoo, like that. That feels tight. That feels tender." And I might choose to do like a little bouncy bounce mob, right? I might come in here and just wiggle it, literally like trying to wiggle a loose tooth, like just trying to wiggle it, and that's going to buy me some range of motion. It's also going to, just the act of physical touch, the act of physical pressure, a lot of times helps people feel pain relief. They might feel enough pain relief that they start to relax enough so that we can start to do some exercises to make it feel better. Now, if I really compress down, really lock everybody out until the only thing left is a little, and they feel better, cool, awesome, they feel better, great. And I also might have finally gotten that one space to move. So what does this mean? So I think about that study that talks about when we do that, when we get a pop, we actually create space in a joint. And I think, man, that's kind of great, because if I'm trying to create space for somebody in a stuck joint, I want to give them space. And then it makes me think about everybody out there who cracks their neck all the time. And I start to wonder, well, it's really difficult to create a cavitation, a noise, exactly where you want it. The only way you're going to get it is if you lock everyone else out. So if I want a cavitation here, I have to set it up so that nobody else can move. We have to like twist and turn. That's why if you go to the chiropractor, if you go to your PT and they like wrap you into this pretzel position and then they go wham, it's because they are trying to make sure that nobody else can contribute to the motion. They only want motion from that one teeny tiny little point. Hopefully that never happens. Um, because you're going to give it your weakest link, right? So if you have hypermobility, so say it's a lumbar spine, say if what's really common, you've got one hinge point and that bad boy moves too much and now it's painful. And these guys don't move enough. Every time you go to crack your back without locking all of these out, guess who's going to crack? The super mobile one. So if cavitation actually provides space to a joint, theoretically, and you have too much motion in a joint, and every time you go to crack it, you feel better for a little bit, but then overall your back feels worse, maybe you're actually introducing more space to a hypermobile joint. So it's not that the cracking is bad, but if you're doing it all the time on a space that doesn't need it, you might actually be continuing the cycle of what doesn't feel good. So what? Here's the final lesson. All the research is so far pointing at it doesn't even matter where you do a mobilization. Most of people get pain relief anyways, right? So if you're tight here and I do some mobilizations, not a manipulation, just a mobilization, that people get better outcomes regardless. Some joints in the body respond very positively to a manipulation. Other joints in the body, it doesn't seem to make a difference. The takeaway is if you're gonna seek that pop, it needs to be for a reason, and it should be where you actually would benefit from having more space. If you find that you're seeking to pop your back all the time, and they actually still have chronic pain or muscle tightness, then you may actually be creating the problem. So go get a movement assessment. Have your joints assessed with a professional and figure out where you actually need mobility and stop worrying about whether or not they're good at cracking your joints.